In the hush of a crowded square, where the weight of history meets the pulse of the present, one old man raised his hand and the world stopped to remember. It was a misty autumn afternoon in 2025, the kind where London's fog weaves a soft veil over the city. And Buckingham Palace stands resolute, its golden stone glowing faintly through the haze. The forecourt was alive with the clamor of hundreds of tourists, their voices a vibrant tapestry of languages, Japanese, Spanish, American mingling with the snap of cameras and the rustle of guidebooks. They had come to witness the changing of the guard, that timeless ritual of precision and pride, a spectacle that seemed to hold time itself in its scarlet-clad embrace. Amid this bustling throng stood Arthur Reynolds, an 85-year-old veteran, his slight frame almost lost in the crowd, yet his presence commanding a quiet reverence. His worn navy greatcoat, a relic of his wartime service, hung loosely on his shoulders, and his steps were slow, guided by the steady hand of his 12-year-old grandson. Liam, Arthur's eyes, clouded by age but alight with memory, scanned the ranks of the royal guards, and in that moment, a single, simple act was poised to transform the square, binding strangers in a shared homage to sacrifice and honor. Arthur was no stranger to the weight of duty. As a young signalman in the Royal Navy during the Second World War, he had braved the icy perils of the Atlantic, guiding convoys through U-boat-infested waters. His courage had earned him a Distinguished Service Medal, though he rarely spoke of it, the medal tucked away in a drawer alongside faded letters from comrades long gone. Now, his world was quieter, confined to a modest flat in Portsmouth, where he shared stories with Liam, the only child of his late daughter. Liam, with his bright eyes and endless questions, was Arthur's pride, a boy who loved history and hung on every word of his grandfather's tales of stormy nights at sea, of Morse code tapped in the dark, of men who laughed in the face of fear. This trip to Buckingham Palace was Liam's dream, sparked by Arthur's stories of the guard's steadfast duty. "They're like us, lad," Arthur had told him, standing firm no matter the storm. Liam, clutching a small notebook where he scribbled his grandfather's anecdotes, walked beside him now, his sneakers scuffing the gravel, his gaze darting between the palace and the old man he adored. The crowd was a living entity, pulsing with anticipation as the guards prepared to march. Families jostled for position, tourists craned their necks, and a few locals, drawn by the ritual's enduring pull, stood quietly at the edges. The mist softened the scene, lending it an almost dreamlike quality, as if the palace were a ship adrift in a sea of faces. Arthur and Liam found a spot near the railings, the boy's excitement palpable as he pointed out the guards' bearskin hats. But the press of the crowd was relentless, elbows and backpacks nudging them, and Arthur's frail frame seemed to shrink beneath the weight of it. A young couple from Manchester offered a sympathetic smile, but most were too absorbed in their own pursuit of the perfect photo to notice the veteran and his grandson. Liam, ever protective, tightened his grip on Arthur's arm, his young face set with determination to keep his grandfather safe. As the guards took their positions, their scarlet tunics a vivid contrast to the grey afternoon, Arthur's gaze settled on one soldier, Sergeant Thomas Bennett, a 24-year-old member of the Coldstream Guards. Thomas stood at his post, his posture a study in discipline, his blue eyes fixed on a point beyond the horizon. A veteran of peacekeeping missions in Cyprus, he had faced tense standoffs and quiet heroism, yet his role as a guardsman demanded a different kind of resolve, one of stillness, of embodying tradition in the face of a watching world. To the tourists, he was a living statue, but beneath his immaculate uniform beat the heart of a young man who had grown up on stories of his own grandfather, a paratrooper at Arnhem. Thomas understood duty, but nothing in his training had prepared him for the encounter that was about to unfold. Arthur, his breath shallow from the walk, leaned closer to Liam. "See that lad there?" he whispered, his voice a soft rasp. "He's got the look of the boys I sailed with. Steady, no matter what." Liam nodded, his pencil pausing in his notebook as he followed his grandfather's gaze. With a slow, deliberate motion, Arthur stepped forward, his cane tapping the gravel, his greatcoat swaying slightly. The crowd, caught up in the anticipation of the ceremony, barely noticed at first, but as Arthur drew within meters of Thomas's post, a ripple of attention spread. A few tourists lowered their cameras, sensing something unusual. A retired nurse from Leeds nudged her friend, whispering, "Look at that old man." Arthur stopped, his frail form silhouetted against the palace gates, and raised his trembling hand. The salute was slow, almost painful in its precision, each movement a testament to a lifetime of service. It was not just for Thomas, but for every comrade Arthur had lost, every storm he had weathered, every dawn he had greeted against the odds. The square fell silent, as if the mist itself had swallowed sound. The chatter of tourists, the click of cameras, the rustle of coats all faded, replaced by a stillness that felt sacred. Liam, standing beside his grandfather, held his breath, his notebook clutched tightly. The crowd's eyes turned to Arthur, then to Thomas, whose rigid stance seemed to waver, though only those closest could see the flicker in his gaze. Protocol demanded that Thomas remain motionless, a sentinel of tradition, unresponsive to the world around him. To break that rule was to risk a reprimand, perhaps even disgrace, in a role where discipline was everything. Yet within Thomas, a storm was brewing. He knew the stories of men like Arthur, men who had faced death so others might live, whose courage had shaped the world he now served. His training screamed to stay still, but his heart, stirred by the sight of Arthur's trembling hand, urged him to act. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken tension. Thomas's mind raced, his pulse quickening beneath his scarlet tunic. He thought of his grandfather, whose tales of wartime sacrifice had inspired him to enlist. He thought of the Guards' Code, drilled into him from his first day. "You are the crown's face." Unmoving, unyielding. But he also thought of the man before him, whose salute was not a challenge, but a bridge, a plea for recognition across the decades. The crowd sensed the conflict, their faces a mix of anticipation and empathy. A Canadian tourist, her own father, a veteran, wiped a tear from her cheek. A teenage boy from London, his phone forgotten, whispered to his mother, "He's got to do something, hasn't he?" Liam, his eyes fixed on Thomas, willed the guardsman to respond, his small hand tightening on Arthur's coat. The moment hung like a fragile thread, connecting past and present, duty and humanity. Then, in a decision that would resonate far beyond the palace gates, Thomas acted. His movement was subtle at first, a slight shift in his shoulders, but it grew into something unmistakable. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his gloved hand, returning Arthur's salute with a precision that mirrored the veteran's. The gesture was more than a salute, it was a vow, a silent promise that the sacrifices of Arthur's generation would never fade from memory. The crowd gasped, then erupted into applause, the sound rolling across the forecourt like a tide breaking on a shore. Tears streamed down faces, from grizzled men in flat caps to young families clutching guidebooks. Arthur's hand lowered, his eyes glistening, and he mouthed a faint "Thank you" to Thomas, his voice too soft to carry, but his gratitude radiant. Liam, his notebook forgotten, stared at his grandfather, then at Thomas, his young world forever altered by the sight of honor meeting honor. The applause had barely faded when Arthur, his strength waning, leaned closer to the railings. "You do us proud, lad," he said, his voice a trembling rasp, each word a gift from a man who had seen too many comrades fall silent. Thomas, still bound by protocol, could not speak, but his eyes softened, a flicker of emotion breaking through his disciplined facade. The crowd, now fully invested, began to respond in kind. An elderly man, his own service medals pinned to his jacket, stepped forward, and raised a salute, his hand steady despite his years. A young woman, a history student from Durham, followed, her salute less practiced but no less heartfelt. Soon, dozens of hands rosy across the square, a quiet chorus of respect that seemed to lift the mist. Liam, caught up in the moment, raised his own small hand, his eyes shining with the pride that would shape him for years to come. The scene was a tapestry of emotion, gratitude, reverence, and a shared recognition of the debt owed to those who had served. A retired teacher from Bristol, her voice thick with tears, turned to her husband. "This is what it's all about, isn't it? Remembering what they gave us." The moment might have ended there, a fleeting act of connection, but its impact was only beginning. A university student named Clara, standing near the back of the crowd, had captured the exchange on her phone. Moved to tears, she wrote a blog post that evening, pouring her heart into a vivid account titled, "The Day Buckingham Palace Stood Still." Her words, raw and evocative, described Arthur's trembling salute, Thomas's courageous response, and the crowd's emotional outpouring. Posted on X, the blog went viral, amassing millions of views within days. Hashtags like veterans, salute, and Buckingham moment trended globally, with users from London to Los Angeles sharing stories of their own encounters with veterans. "My granddad was at Normandy," wrote a woman from Glasgow. "This made me feel like he's still seen." An American veteran posted, "Respect from Texas. That guardsman's a credit to his uniform." The story struck a chord, resonating with a world hungry for moments of unity and gratitude. Inspired by Clara's post, veterans groups across Britain seized the moment. The Royal British Legion organized a series of reunions, inviting Arthur to share his stories at their gatherings. He attended one in Portsmouth, his greatcoat now a symbol of resilience, and spoke of his wartime service with a quiet dignity that hushed the room. He told of signaling through storms, of comrades lost to the sea, of the hope that kept them going. The events raised thousands for military charities, supporting veterans and their families. And Arthur's name became a rallying cry for those who felt the past was too often forgotten. Local councils, moved by the story, began hosting salute days, where veterans were invited to share their experiences with schoolchildren, ensuring that the lessons of sacrifice endured. For Thomas, the salute was a turning point. That evening, in the quiet of his barracks, he penned a letter to Arthur, a rare departure from his usual reserve. "Your salute changed me, sir," he wrote. "It reminded me that my duty is not just to the crown, but to the people who built this nation. Men like you, who gave everything. I'll carry that moment with me always." The letter, delivered to Arthur's modest flat, brought tears to the old man's eyes. He kept it on his mantel, beside a faded photo of his Navy crew, a quiet reminder that his service still mattered. Thomas, promoted to lieutenant in the years that followed, began mentoring young recruits, emphasizing that discipline must be tempered by humanity. His superiors, initially wary of his breach of penalty, came to see it as a defining act, one that strengthened the guard's bond with the public. Thomas's letter to Arthur marked a shift in his perspective, a realization that the guards were not just ceremonial figures, but guardians of a living legacy, entrusted with honoring those who had paved the way. Arthur's influence grew in ways he could never have imagined. He became a regular speaker at local schools, his visits eagerly awaited by children who sat rapt as he described life on the convoys. The crackle of the radio, the camaraderie that sustained his crew through the darkest nights. Liam, always at his side, recorded these talks on a small recorder, creating an archive that would preserve his grandfather's voice for generations. Arthur's stories were not just history lessons, but lessons in character, teaching the children about resilience, loyalty, and the quiet courage of ordinary people in extraordinary times. At one school, a shy girl presented him with a drawing of a sailor saluting a guardsman, her small gift bringing a rare smile to Arthur's weathered face. "You've got it right, lass," he said. tucking the drawing into his coat. The visits became a ritual, each one a bridge between the past and the future. And Arthur, despite his frailty, found a renewed sense of purpose in sharing his truth. The story of that afternoon at Buckingham Palace took on a life of its own, woven into the fabric of Britain's collective memory. Newspapers ran features on Arthur and Thomas, with the Times calling it a salute that stopped time, and the Sun proclaiming, "Hero, vet, and guard unite nation." The BBC aired a documentary, interviewing witnesses from the crowd, including Clara, whose blog had sparked the phenomenon. The program explored the enduring bond between Britain's military past and present, with historians noting that Arthur's salute had rekindled a national conversation about gratitude. The video of the salute continued to circulate, shared by veterans groups, schools, and even foreign embassies, its message of respect transcending borders. In Parliament, MPs cited the incident in debates about veterans' welfare, leading to increased funding for mental health services for former service members. The story became a touchstone, a reminder that small acts could ripple outward, touching lives far beyond their origin. Arthur's final years were marked by a quiet fulfillment. He continued his school visits, his greatcoat a familiar sight in Portsmouth's classrooms, and he corresponded with Thomas. Their letters, a private thread of mutual respect. Liam, growing into a thoughtful teenager, took on the role of his grandfather's chronicler, digitizing Arthur's stories and sharing them online, where they reached thousands. When Arthur passed away in 2027, his funeral was a modest affair, held in a small church near the sea he had once sailed. Family, friends, and a few old comrades gathered to bid him farewell, their voices soft with love and loss. But among the mourners was a figure in a scarlet tunic, Captain Thomas Bennet, now a seasoned officer, who had traveled from London to pay his respects. As the service ended, Thomas stepped forward, his boots crisp on the churchyard gravel, and offered a final salute to the man who had changed his life. The gesture was slow, deliberate, a mirror of the salute they had shared 2 years before. Liam, now Partier, stood tall beside his grandfather's coffin, his own hand rising in a steady salute, his eyes wet but resolute. The moment closed, a circle, linking past and future, sacrifice and gratitude, in a silence that spoke louder than words. The legacy of Arthur and Thomas endured, a beacon in a world often too busy to pause. In Portsmouth, a small plaque was erected near the docks, honoring Arthur's service and his moment at Buckingham Palace. Schools across Britain incorporated the story into their curricula, using it to teach empathy, respect, and the value of history. Veterans groups, inspired by Arthur's example, launched mentorship programs, pairing former service members with young people like Liam, ensuring that the lessons of the past lived on. Thomas, now a respected officer, carried Arthur's memory into his work, training his recruits to see their role as more than ceremonial, to be guardians of a nation's heart. Tourists at Buckingham Palace, hearing the story from guides or reading it in guidebooks, watched the guards with a new reverence, aware that behind the stoic facade were men and women capable of extraordinary humanity. For older Britons who had grown up in the shadow of war, the story of Arthur's salute was a balm, a reminder of a time when duty and decency were the bedrock of society. In pubs from Plymouth to Perth, the tale was shared over pints, with nods of pride and murmurs of, "That's our lot." All right. It evoked memories of parents and grandparents who had served, of communities that rallied together in times of hardship, of a Britain that stood firm because of men like Arthur. The image of his trembling hand, met by Thomas's steady salute, became iconic, a symbol of gratitude that transcended generations. It posed a question to all who heard it. In a moment of truth, would you follow the rules, or would you follow your heart? If this story has touched you, share it with those who cherish the values of gratitude and respect. Let Arthur's salute live on, a quiet call to honor the past and inspire the future.